Stephen Ellis. You really believed those promises, didn't you? That your grandmother was going to hand you a future on a silver platter while the rest of us worked for everything we have. Stephen Ellis. Those medical records don't lie. She was slipping for months. We just made sure the courts saw the truth before you could twist it for your own gain. Stephen Ellis. Your stepmother warned me you would pull something like this. Always the one with your hand out, never the one contributing anything real to this family. Stephen Ellis. Sign the power of attorney and the release forms. It's over, Morgan. The money is gone, and there is nothing left for you to claim. Stephen Ellis. Stop acting like the victim. The future she dangled in front of you was never going to happen. It was pity, not a promise. Hi, my name is Morgan Ellis. I am 33 years old. I was standing in the staff break room at Naples General Hospital when that call came through. My scrub still carried the sharp smell of antiseptic from the last patient I had stabilized. The words from my father hit like ice water poured straight down my spine. I had just finished a 12-hour shift and was trying to eat a cold turkey sandwich when his name lit up my phone screen. I answered because part of me still hoped he was calling about something ordinary, like final arrangements or the will reading. Instead, he came at me with those exact lines, each one chosen to make me feel small, greedy, and pathetic. I did not raise my voice. I asked him what medical records he was talking about. He laughed, that short-cutting sound he used whenever he wanted to shut a conversation down for good. He told me I should stop digging because I would not like what I found. Then he hung up without another word. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about my own life cracked open. My grandmother Dorothy had always been clear-headed, even in her final months. She had pulled me aside more than once and said she wanted me to have enough to finally get ahead on my own. She knew I had been quietly saving for nurse practitioner school and a small place of my own inside the same gated enclave where they lived. She called it my fresh start. My father and stepmother Patricia had been in the room for some of those conversations. They had nodded along like it was already decided. Now my father was telling me none of it had ever been real. I drove straight to their house after my shift ended. The upscale gated enclave in Naples felt colder than it ever had before. The guard at the gate waved me through without the usual nod. When I pulled into the driveway, my stepmother's car was already there. I did not knock. I used the spare key my grandmother had given me years earlier. The house was quiet, except for the low, steady hum of the air conditioning. I went straight to the study where she had always kept her important papers in the bottom drawer of the oak desk. That is where I found the first altered document. It was a printed copy of her medical file from Dr. Ethan Ward's office. The notes claimed she had shown clear signs of advanced cognitive decline for over a year. Dates had been changed. New symptoms had been added that I had never witnessed during any of the appointments I had attended with her. I knew those records. I had sat beside her. None of this matched what I remembered from the actual visits. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. I took clear photographs of every page before anyone could stop me. Then I heard low voices coming from the kitchen. My father and stepmother were talking in careful, measured tones. I stayed in the hallway just out of sight listening. My father said the transfers had already gone through and that Taylor would be taken care of. My stepmother replied that I had always been the problem, that I was too emotional and too entitled to handle any real responsibility. She said the changes to the records were necessary to protect the family assets from my constant demands. I stepped into the kitchen doorway. My father turned his face, hardening the second he saw me. He asked what I was doing there. I held up my phone with the photograph of the altered record on the screen. I asked him how he could do this to grandmother's wishes. He did not deny it. He just said I should have stayed out of it like a good daughter. He told me the help grandmother had mentioned for my schooling and a place of my own had been a mistake, something she only said because she felt sorry for me. Patricia stood right beside him, arms crossed tight over her chest, and added that I had no right to question their decisions after everything the family had already done for me. The words landed like a series of precise, deliberate cuts. I felt my chest tighten, but I did not cry. I told them I was taking the records to someone who could verify every change. My father stepped closer and said if I did that, I would regret it for the rest of my life. He said the family gatherings were already over for me if I kept pushing. Patricia nodded once and said Taylor did not need this kind of ugly drama before her own life moved forward. I left without another word. I drove 2 streets over to Isabella Cruz's house. She was a neighbor who had been close with my grandmother too. She let me in without asking questions. I showed her the photographs. She went pale. She told me she had seen emails. She had access to a shared family calendar app that sometimes pulled in message threads. She pulled out her tablet and showed me a long thread between my father, Dr. Ethan Ward, and my stepmother. The subject line was simple: handling the Dorothy situation. In the emails, they discussed exactly how to change the dates on the records and how to present everything to the estate attorney. Dr. Ward had written that he owed my father a favor from years back and would handle the documentation without questions. My stepmother had replied that once the assets were protected, they could finally stop worrying about me asking for handouts. I felt the floor drop out from under me. This was not just greed or panic after grandmother died. This was planned months in advance. They had used her final months to rewrite history so they could take everything she had wanted for me. Isabella asked what I was going to do. I did not have an answer yet. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from my father. It said only, "Last chance to sign and stay quiet, or you lose everything, including us." I showed Isabella the text. She said I needed to be careful and offered to keep secure copies of everything. I thanked her and drove home. On the way, I kept replaying the kitchen conversation. The way my father had said the future was never real. The way my stepmother had stood there agreeing like it was the most natural thing in the world. I pulled into my own driveway and sat in the car with the engine off for a long time. The gated enclave around me suddenly felt like a place I had been trying to earn my way into for years, only to discover the gate had been locked from the inside all along. Have you ever watched the people who raised you rewrite your entire history in real time, just to take what was meant to give you a chance? Would you still choose yourself when doing so means the family gatherings end and you are left standing alone with nothing but the truth? I sat there for another minute staring at the dark screen of my phone. Then I made the only decision that felt like mine. I called Isabella back and asked her to forward every email she could pull without getting herself in trouble. She did it within the hour. The full thread showed months of planning. Dr. Ethan Ward had agreed to alter the dates and add false notes about my grandmother's mental state in exchange for my father covering an old malpractice issue he had quietly fixed years earlier. My stepmother had written that once the assets were moved, they could finally stop pretending I had any claim to a fresh start that was never going to happen. The next morning I went to work like nothing had changed. I was halfway through my shift when my father called the nurse's station. The charge nurse handed me the phone with a raised eyebrow. I took it in the supply closet so no one would hear. "You went to Isabella's house last night," my father said. His voice was low and flat, the way it got when he was done performing for other people. "You really think she's going to side with you over family? She knows where her bread is buttered, Everyone in that enclave does. I told him I had the emails. There was a long pause. Then he laughed once, short and ugly. Those emails prove nothing except that we were protecting your grandmother from her own bad decisions. You were always going to twist this into some story about how we stole your future. There was never any future to steal, Morgan. She felt sorry for you. That's all it ever was. I asked him why he had involved Dr. Ward. He didn't deny it. He said the doctor owed him, and that was none of my business. Then he told me to stop playing detective before I ruined what little reputation I still had at the hospital. Your stepmother already called the administrator's office this morning, he added. She mentioned you've been under a lot of stress since your grandmother died. People get worried about nurses who start seeing conspiracies everywhere. He hung up before I could answer. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the metal shelf to stay upright. They were already trying to paint me as unstable at work, the same way they had painted my grandmother as incompetent on paper. I texted Isabella the second I got off shift. She met me in the hospital parking garage an hour later. She looked shaken. She said my stepmother had called her that afternoon and warned her to stay out of family matters. Then Isabella showed me the newest message in the thread. My father had written to Dr. Ward and my stepmother that if I kept pushing, they would have no choice but to file for a restraining order and let the hospital know I was harassing grieving family members. Dr. Ward had replied with a single line. Handled on my end. The updated file is already in the system. That was the second mini cliffhanger of the day. They weren't just rewriting the past. They were ready to rewrite my present and my future at the hospital if I didn't back down. I drove straight to my sister Taylor's condo after that. She lived 2 gates over in the same enclave. I had to know if she was part of it or if she had been kept in the dark like I once was. She opened the door in workout clothes, already annoyed. When I told her what I had found, she didn't look surprised. She just sighed and said, "Dad warned me you would do this. You can't stand that grandmother wanted the family to be secure instead of handing everything to the one person who never appreciated what she already had." I asked her if she knew about the altered records. She shrugged. Grandma was confused at the end. Everyone saw it. You were the only one pretending she was still sharp so you could get what you wanted. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice. You need to stop. Dad and Patricia are serious about the restraining order. They already talked to a lawyer. If you keep showing up and making accusations, they will cut you off completely. No more holidays, no more anything. Is that what you want? I told her the truth. I wanted the truth. She laughed, bitter and sharp. The truth is you were never going to get that money. It was never promised to you in any way that mattered. Grandma said a lot of things when she was sick. Dad and Patricia just made sure the legal version matched reality. She closed the door in my face before I could answer. I sat in my car outside her building for 20 minutes trying to breathe. The emails, the altered records, my father's threats at the hospital, Taylor's casual dismissal, it all pointed to the same thing. They had decided years ago that I didn't deserve a future of my own, and they had spent the time since grandmother's death making sure I never got one. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a group text from my stepmother to me, Taylor, and my father. She had attached a new document. It was a draft of a letter to the hospital administration, raising concerns about my mental state and suggesting I be placed on administrative leave pending an evaluation. She had written it in the same calm, concerned tone she used at family dinners. At the bottom, she had added one line, just for me. This can all stop if you sign the papers and let us handle grandmother's affairs the way she would have wanted. I forwarded the entire group text and the attached letter to Isabella with one sentence. They're coming for my job now. She replied 30 seconds later with a screenshot. The full email thread had just been forwarded to her by accident. Someone had hit reply all on a message that included the hospital administrator's address. The original thread was now sitting in the inbox of at least 4 people outside the family. My father had written, "If Morgan forces our hand, we go public with the stress leave recommendation immediately. Ward already updated the records. No one will believe her side once the medical file is official." That was the leak. It had happened in the middle of the crisis they created. The secret they had kept for months was now sitting in someone else's inbox because they had gotten sloppy trying to threaten me into silence. I drove home on autopilot. Every light on the street felt too bright. When I pulled into my driveway, the house next door had its porch light on. I could see Isabella's silhouette in her kitchen window. She was probably watching to make sure I made it inside. I sat in the car again, the same way I had the night before, and let the weight of it settle. They had stolen the only thing my grandmother had tried to give me that was truly mine. They had used a doctor falsified records and were now willing to destroy my career to keep it. And the worst part was that some small, exhausted piece of me still wanted to believe there had been a misunderstanding. That the father who used to take me to the park when I was little would never have done this on purpose. But the emails were real. The altered dates were real. The threat to my job was real. The promised future had never existed except as a story they told themselves so they could sleep at night. I walked inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor with my back against it. My phone lit up one more time. It was my father. The message was short. "Last warning. Sign by tomorrow or we file everything in the morning. Your choice." I did not answer. I turned the phone off and left it on the kitchen counter. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the old pull to fix it, to explain myself, to make them see me as their daughter instead of the problem. I only felt the cold, steady clarity that comes when you finally understand the people who raised you have been treating you like an obstacle for a very long time. I had one night to decide what came next. They had already decided for me on everything else. I turned my phone back on the next morning only because I needed to see what they would do next. The message from my father was still there, time-stamped hours earlier. "Last warning. Sign by tomorrow or we file everything in the morning. Your choice." I read it once, then deleted the thread. I printed every email Isabella had forwarded, every altered page of my grandmother's medical file, and the draft letter my stepmother had sent to the hospital. I put them in a plain manila folder and drove to their house in the gated enclave one last time. They were all there when I walked in without knocking. My father stood by the kitchen island in his usual button-down shirt, arms crossed. My stepmother, Patricia, sat at the table with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. My sister Taylor leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone, like this was just another family disagreement she was tired of hearing about. I set the folder on the island between us. My father looked at it, then at me. "You really came here with that." His voice was calm, in the way that always meant he was about to get cruel. "You think printing out some emails is going to change anything? Dr. Ward already confirmed the records. He said your grandmother was confused for a long time. Everyone knows it except you." I told him the emails showed he had asked the doctor to change the dates. He laughed once, short and cold. "You were always looking for a reason to make yourself the victim. That money was never promised to you in any way that counted. Your grandmother said a lot of things when she was sick. We just made the paperwork match what actually happened." Patricia spoke for the first time. "We protected this family. You would have blown through it on some fantasy about starting over. Taylor has a real life. She has plans. You have always been the one who needed extra help and never appreciated it." Taylor finally looked up from her phone. "Mom's right. You turned every holiday into some test about who loved you more. Grandma felt sorry for you. That's why she said those things. Dad and Patricia just cleaned up the mess so the rest of us could move on. The words kept coming. My father said I had spent my whole life waiting for someone to hand me an easy future, instead of building one. Patricia said I had embarrassed them by showing up at the hospital with accusations. Taylor said if I kept this up, none of them would ever speak to me again, and that was probably for the best. Every sentence was another small, precise cut, meant to make me feel like the problem had always been me. I felt something in my chest give way. The folder stayed on the counter. My hands started shaking and I couldn't stop them. I had come here thinking I could make them see the truth. Instead, they were standing in the kitchen where my grandmother used to make tea and telling me the only truth that mattered to them was the one they had written down. I started crying before I could stop it. Not quiet tears, the kind that made my shoulders shake and my voice crack when I finally spoke. I just wanted to matter to you, I said. Not the money, not the house. I wanted to matter enough that you wouldn't rewrite her last months to cut me out. That's all I ever wanted. No one moved to comfort me. My father's face stayed hard. Patricia looked away like the sight of me falling apart was inconvenient. Taylor shook her head once, like she had expected this breakdown all along. That was when the front door opened. None of us had heard a car. A woman I had never seen before stepped into the kitchen. She was in her 50s, dark hair pulled back, holding a small leather folder. She looked at all of us for a second, then spoke directly to my father. "My name is Elena Vargas," she said. "Dorothy Ellis was my mother. She reached out to me 6 months before she died. She wanted to make sure I knew about the accounts she had set aside. She also told me someone might try to change the medical records to keep me from claiming what she left." The room went completely still. My father's face lost all color. Patricia set her coffee cup down too hard. Taylor stopped scrolling. Elena Vargas opened her folder and placed a notarized letter and a copy of an older will on the island next to mine. The dates on her documents were from before any of the alterations. She had already contacted the estate attorney. The assets were now tied up in probate because 2 conflicting claims had surfaced at the same time. She looked at me then. "Your grandmother mentioned you. She said you were the one who actually visited her without asking for anything. I thought you should know before they try to bury this, too." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The breakdown had passed as suddenly as it came. In its place was something quieter and much colder. I looked at my father, at Patricia, at Taylor. They were all staring at Elena Vargas like she was a problem they had not planned for. I realized in that moment that even if every record was corrected and every email was public, I did not want any part of what was left. The people in this kitchen had already decided years ago that I was the obstacle. The promised future had been a story they told themselves so they could sleep. It had never been real for me. I picked up my folder. I did not take Elena's documents. I looked at my father and said the only thing left to say. "I'm done. Do whatever you need to do with the lawyer and the hospital. I won't be there to fight you for it. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't show up at my door. Family gatherings are over for me. I'm not coming back." He started to say something about how I was overreacting, but I had already turned. I walked past Elena Vargas, who gave me a small nod like she understood. I walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove away from the gated enclave without looking in the rearview mirror. I went to the hospital the next morning and handed in my resignation. I told HR everything and gave them copies of the emails and the altered records. They put me on paid administrative leave while they investigated, but I had already decided I was not going back. The job that had once felt like the start of something stable now just felt like another place where my father's reach could still touch me. I packed what I needed, listed my townhouse, and moved to a small rental 30 minutes outside Naples. No gate, no neighbors who knew my family. Just quiet. The legal mess with the estate dragged on for months. Elena Vargas's claim held up. Some of the assets were frozen while the attorneys sorted through the conflicting documents and the altered records. My father and stepmother tried to push the stress leave narrative at the hospital, but the emails made it impossible for them to look clean. They lost the respect they had spent years cultivating in the enclave. Taylor's engagement plans quietly fell apart when her fiancé's family heard the rumors. None of it brought me any satisfaction. I did not watch from a distance or feel vindicated. I simply stopped caring what happened to any of them. Some nights, I still cried in the new rental, not because I missed them, but because the version of family I had carried in my head for 33 years had never actually existed. The silence I had kept for so long had protected my heart from believing their story about me. Now that same silence was the only boundary I had left. I did not reach out. I did not explain myself to anyone who asked why I had disappeared from family events. I let the gatherings end because I had finally accepted that showing up had always cost me more than it ever gave back. I still work as a nurse, just at a smaller clinic now. I take extra shifts when I want to and say no when I don't. I am saving again, slower this time, for whatever comes next. There is no dramatic new beginning waiting for me. There is only the steady knowledge that I chose myself when choosing myself meant walking away from everyone who was supposed to love me and accepting that I would be alone on the other side. Thank you for listening to my story. If someone who should have protected you rewrote your history to take the future they once promised, would you still choose yourself, even when it means the family gatherings end, and you have to build a life with nothing but the truth and your own silence to keep you company?